All right, ladies and gentlemen, welcome aboard the Steve Malzberg Show. Thank you for joining us. And, of course, at the top of the news today, we got word from an appeals court in New York, and it revived a challenge to the NSA program that collected the records of millions of Americans' phone calls. This had been a lawsuit filed by the ACLU, and by today's decision, the court has now sent it back to the lower court. They did not rule on the constitutionality of the of this as it applies to the Fourth Amendment in any way, shape, or form. But joining us now is a man who could speak to his feelings on this decision, what it means, and the program itself, as we have discussed with him many times, a program which, ironically enough, as some of you know, the Patriot Act and many provisions of the Patriot Act sunset. And this particular program, I believe, is due to sunset at the end of this month. So joining us now is General Michael Hayden, of course, retired four-star general in the U.S. Air Force, former director of both the CIA and the NSA, and principal at the Chertoff Group. Hello, General. How are you, sir?
I'm doing well, Steve. Good to talk to you again.
Well, it's always good to talk to you. All right, this decision, when you heard about it, what was your reaction?
Mild surprise and mild disappointment, but both mild because of what the decision means and doesn't mean. I think you set it up quite correctly. The court did not rule on its constitutionality, didn't say what NSA was doing was unconstitutional, simply said that they didn't think that the language of the legislation supported the robust collection program that NSA felt that the legislation had authorized, sent it back to the court, did not tell NSA to stop doing anything, and pretty much, as you suggested, Congress has got 3 weeks to make up their mind and decide what it is they want NSA to do in this regard.
Right, and what would you advise the Congress to do?
Well, my preferred option is just reauthorize the current program. And frankly, since no one can claim now, Steve, that Congress doesn't know what this language means in terms of what NSA is doing, I think a reauthorization would authorize and be all the legal underpinning that NSA would need. If they cannot get a simple reauthorization of the current Patriot Act, then I think this goes to the carriers. The metadata is kept by them. NSA has to go through the carriers in order to query the metadata. If they do that, Steve, at a minimum, I think by law we need to require the carriers to keep the metadata for a certain fixed period of time, probably 2 to 3 years. And they may not do that based upon their own business needs.
What about the expediency? In other words, will this, I won't say how will it, because I don't know, if they cannot reauthorize it and the scenario you just talked about comes to fruition, will the program still be as effective and will it still be as quick in being able to pick up on red flag phone conversations?
Yeah, Steve, great question. And what you've got here under scenario A and scenario B are pluses and minuses. So you pick out a minus right away. This will not be as agile, period, because if you're going to track a phone call across multiple American carriers, that's going to be clumsy and cumbersome and take longer than it otherwise would be. So that's one reality. The second reality, though, Steve, is, NSA is not getting all the data now. When this program...
All right, we're losing the General just a little bit. General, do you still hear me? All right, so we'll try to reestablish contact with the General here on the Steve Malzberg Show, and what the General has said, again, stressing the fact that this law, the decision by the appeals court today, does not rule on the constitutionality of the NSA program. And with the expiration of the NSA program due to kick in at the end of this month, he urges the Congress to reauthorize the program. Otherwise, other options where the carriers would keep the metadata So far, option one, it would slow down the process, and we've now reestablished contact with the general. You were starting to say option number two and what the effect would be, but we lost you there.
Right.
So what's option number two,
Okay.
General? Yeah.
So if you go to option two, Steve, you do have this clumsiness that you've got to move across the carriers to line up the metadata and track the calls. But you actually will probably end up getting more data available to you. When this started, it was about landlines, and we were fairly comprehensive in the data NSA was getting. The longer we've gone on, the more this has been about cell phones. And frankly, the carriers don't collect that data in the same way, and it's not been passed on to NSA. So you're going to give up some agility. If you don't require the carriers to keep the data for a longer period of time, you're going to give up some depth. But under option B, you might actually get a little more breadth than you're getting now.
So for
we'll see how it works out.
Yeah, so for the layman's ears, you want it to be reauthorized the way it is, but if it's not, then there's positives and negatives in that.
Right, and the one thing you got to do, if it's not reauthorized the way it is, Steve, is to set some time limit on the carriers where they too have to retain the data.
Yeah, it's a very interesting situation. What about the broader aspect, the Patriot Act and the sunset provisions there? Would you also recommend a reauthorization of of the Patriot Act as a whole?
Yeah, I would, Steve. And I know this has become a bit of a lightning rod or a third rail in American political discourse, but when I'm in front of audiences and they complain about the Patriot Act, I say, well, would you give me an example, please, of what civil liberty you've lost because of the Patriot Act? And generally, a long silence follows. This has not been abused, and this has been useful for people to keep us safe. And Steve, after what happened in Texas last Sunday, the homegrown guys with these very limited relationships with ISIS, this may not be the time for our giving up approaches that allow us to connect the dots between foreign and domestic terrorism.
No, I couldn't agree with you more. By the way, that silence is if you ask people to name one economic policy that George W. Bush implemented that led to the economic crisis, you get the same silence because there is none, and it wasn't his policy. But that's a whole nother story. Let me ask you quickly about Texas. We now find out that the FBI did send a warning in close proximity to the event to the Garland police force. So I guess they were picking up signals. But boy, we are just so vulnerable. And are you annoyed by the focus that has gone on in the other direction, that this event shouldn't have been held, that they were asking for trouble, they should have known better, they know what to expect, instead of, hey, how do we stop these bad guys?
Yeah, I'm in both camps, Steve. This event was unnecessarily provocative and insulting to one of the world's great religions. That said, as a Christian, I didn't go get a gun when somebody put a crucifix in a jar of urine several years ago. And so you've got both aspects here. Look, this kind of threat might be the tariff we have to pay in order to keep a free and open society. There may not be a whole lot more we can do to really raise our confidence that we can stop these kinds of attacks. Look, Steve, we'll do everything we can, but unless we're willing to trade in our civil liberties in a significant way, I just fear this stuff from time to time is just going to happen.
Interesting that you would say that, which really lends credence to people listening to you who would, and I think it solidifies in their minds that you really believe the NSA program is not, and the Patriot Act is not a sacrifice of our civil liberties. Based on what you just said, I think it was very revealing. You're speaking from the heart. General, always great to talk to you, sir. Thank you so much.
Thanks, Steve.
All right, General Michael Hayden, ladies and gentlemen. Very, very interesting. All right, when we come back, the Deputy Press Secretary for Youth and Conservative Media for the RNC, Rafi Williams, will be here coming up next right here on the Steve Malzberg Show. Lots to talk about with Rafi, so don't go away.